Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Community Development Block Grant Coronavirus webinar. My name is Natasha Kukowski, and I'm the manager for the Small Cities Development Program at DEED, Department of Employment and Economic Development. Today's webinar will be presented by myself, and joining me will be Small City staff Michelle Vang, Zachary Clear, Emma Jean Ford, and Chris Nordang. This webinar is going to give you an overview of the use of CDBG-CV funds specifically for the different applications that DEED had received approval from HUD to be used in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Before we dive into our webinar, I would like to take a moment to cover some logistics. We are using a Teams platform for this webinar. To avoid any interference with the audio or video, please turn off your camera and disconnect from your VPN. All participants will be muted, but please feel free to use the conversation bubble located at the top of the screen to post your questions. We'll try to address as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. And questions that were not addressed will be compiled into a FAQ and posted at DEED's website in a couple days. So let's get started. The agenda is outlined in this slide. We will be giving you an overview of the CDBG-CV program, funding background, CDBG-CV dollars that have been allocated to the state, and national objectives. We will also be discussing the eligible activities for the CDBG-CV program, requirements that go with it, scoring criteria, application and timeline, and finally some standard FAQs and Q&As at the end of the presentation. Our funding originates from the Coronavirus Aid, Relief and Economic Security Act, CARES Act, that was signed by President Trump on March 27, 2020, to respond to the growing effects of this public health crisis. The state, in turn, submitted a substantial amendment to the state's comprehensive plan to create a CDBG-CV program, which has been approved by HUD. Let's talk about the use of CDBG funds and the relationship to COVID. As per the CARES Act and subsequent federal notice, all CDBG-CV funds must be used for CDBG-eligible activities that are carried out to prevent, prepare for, and respond to the coronavirus, COVID-19. They cannot be used for any other purpose and must meet a national objective, which we will be discussing in the next following slides. Another caveat is that at least 70% of CDBG-CV funds must be expended for activities benefiting low to moderate income persons. The remaining 30% may be used for COVID-19 activities that meets an urgent need national objective. HUD has allocated CDBG-CV funds in 3 separate rounds. The total allocation of CDBG-CV funds for the state of Minnesota is just over $37.6 million. In round 1, HUD had allocated a little over $11.2 million to non-entitlements. This would be units of general local government in the greater Minnesota area. Round 2 is a little over $17.4 million to both entitlements and non-entitlements. And finally, round 3 is a little over $8.9 million. These 3 rounds are pooled into one pot of money with the condition that $11.2 million, which is the amount in the first round, must be allocated to non-entitlements only. So, who is eligible to apply? Let's dive into the definition of a non-entitlement jurisdiction and an entitlement community. A non-entitlement jurisdiction is units of general local government, cities with less than 50,000 and counties with less than 200,000 in population. In Minnesota, this would be the cities and counties in the greater Minnesota area that has not accepted special entitlement status with HUD. An entitlement community includes the cities listed in the slide: Bloomington, Coon Rapids, Duluth, Eden Prairie, Mankato, Minneapolis, Minnetonka, Fargo, Moorhead, Plymouth, Rochester, St. Cloud, St. Paul, Woodbury, and counties of Hennepin, Anoka, Dakota, Ramsey, Washington, and St. Louis. Smaller cities may choose to partner on projects. Also important to note, projects can be carried out in tribal areas, but must obtain the consent of the tribe with the jurisdiction over the tribal area. All activities funded with CDBG funds must meet a national objective, so does the CDBG-CV funds. There are three primary national objectives. The first, benefiting low to moderate income persons, and this can be achieved through direct benefit of 100% LMI or indirect benefit LMA, which stands for low moderate area benefit, where at least 51% of the beneficiaries are LMI and reside in a particular area, or low moderate limited clientele, where at least 51% of the beneficiaries are LMI and must provide benefits to a specific group of persons rather than a concentration in the service area. The next national objective is the prevention or elimination of slum and blight. It is unlikely that an activity will be using this national objective for this program. The final national objective is meeting an urgent need, which poses a serious and immediate threat to the health or welfare of the community. There is a link provided in the resource slide for guidance on the national objectives. Let's now focus on the LMI national objective. How do you determine when someone is LMI? Well, an individual is considered LMI based on their annual family income. The total household income is compared to the area median income in the county they reside. If the income is under 50% of the area median income, it is considered low. And if the income is under 80% of the area median income, it is considered moderate. The link in the slide will take you to the HUD website for income data sets. The next few slides will show you how to navigate within the HUD income limits website to determine the area median income. Most of you should already be familiar with this process. When you are in this page, you will need to select the year. Make sure you use the most current year. Then under the Access Individual Income Limits areas, select the Click Here for FY 2020 Income Limits documentation. Do not select the option for median family income. Next, you will need to select the state and the county. Once you have made your selection, you will see the income limit summary for the county you had chosen. For this scenario, I had selected Waseca, and the maximum requirement for LMI is not to exceed the 80% median income of the county, and that is circled in red. The Urgent Need National Objective. When submitting an application with an Urgent Need National Objective, You will need to complete the Urgent Need National Objective Certification Worksheet, which is on our website. To meet this national objective, 3 criteria need to be documented. We will go through each criteria. The first criteria, you will need to determine if the activity proposed is designed to alleviate existing conditions. You will need to maintain documentation in the project file that demonstrates this activity prevents, prepares for, or responds to coronavirus. Your proposed activity may meet 2 national objectives, the LMI and urgent need. If so, please use the LMI national objective. All applications are going to meet an urgent need national objective. But keep in mind, only 30% of CDBG-CV funding will go to solely urgent need national objective projects. The second criteria, does the condition pose a serious and immediate threat to the health or welfare of the community that is of recent origin or that recently became urgent? You will need to certify that activity is indeed designed to alleviate existing conditions which pose a serious and immediate threat to the health or welfare of the community by one of the 3 methods that we are going to be discussing in the next slides. In this slide, we have listed the 3 methods to satisfy the second criteria. You may choose to refer to the United States Department of Health and Human Services issued press release declaring a public health emergency for the entire United States. The link is in this slide. Or you could refer to the President's declaration of the ongoing coronavirus disease 2019 COVID-19 pandemic as an emergency of sufficient severity and magnitude to warrant an emergency declaration. Or finally, you could refer to the effective dates of the grantee's own local or state emergency declaration. The final criteria, criteria 3, is the grantee or the unit of general local government unable to finance the activity on its own or other sources of funds are not available. You will need to provide documentation that the grantee or the unit of general local government is unable to finance the activity on its own. You will also need to be in compliance with the mandatory duplication of benefit requirements to demonstrate that no other funds are available for the activity. Now that we have gone through the national objectives, let's focus on the CDBG-CV allocation breakdown by activity. As shown on the slide, 7%, which is about 2.6 million, is set aside for state administration, which leaves a balance of around 34.9 million for activities. Based on feedback received, DEED is focusing on 3 major categories: broadband development at 25.4 million, public services at 5 million, and retrofitting, repurposing buildings, and commercial rehab at 4.5 million. Administration reimbursement. Administration funds are capped at a 13% max of the actual project cost. DEED is allowing up to 5% of the admin budget to be drawn for startup expenses after the grant contract execution. These could include environmental reviews and the development of required policies. After the 5% has been drawn, subsequent disbursements cannot exceed the percentage of the actual completed project cost. A reminder, please include whole percentages when preparing the budget. Let's not have a 12.5% or 11.5%. Let's keep it as a whole percentage. Let's dive into the activities now. Total assistance of about 25.4 million is set aside for broadband development, with an assumed maximum of 5 million per project. The objective of this activity is to provide broadband infrastructure and all components, enhancing internet access to support increased connectivity to telework, telemedicine, telelearning, and televisit or gatherings. The broadband infrastructure includes cost of a tower, middle and last mile infrastructure to underserved or unserved areas. It also has another component of communication enhancements to end users, which include but not limited to installation of lines to residential homes, multifamily buildings, or low to moderate limited clientele. I would like to point out that this is a one-time only program under CDBG-CV and is not associated with the border-to-border broadband development grant program managed by Minnesota Office of Broadband Development. You can check out their program on DEED's website. Broadband infrastructure activities would most likely meet the LMA national objective, low to moderate income on an area basis. Keep in mind that activities that are associated with service or communication enhancement must benefit the low to moderate income persons or household. So now that we know what the national objective would be for broadband, how do we determine it? Well, to aid in calculating the LMA for the entire proposed area, please select the link on the slide, which will take you to a HUD tutorial. I assure you it is worth watching, and many of you might even want to add that to your favorite. Well, to begin, please make sure you have an idea of the entire proposed area. To start the video, click on the video thumbnail or the text demonstrate area benefit to low and moderate income persons. Video time applicable for the mapping application can be found at the 16-minute 50-second marker to the 17-minute 20-second marker. And specific information for calculating the LMI percentage can be found from the 18-minute 37-second marker to the 21-minute 18-second marker. You can find this information on the broadband application. If you propose areas that are within the cities of Bloomington, Eden Prairie, Plymouth, Woodbury, or counties of Dakota, St. Louis, and Washington, please contact Small Cities Development Program staff to discuss how to best calculate the LMI percentage. Ineligible activities. There are some broadband activities that cannot use CDBG-CV funds. For starters, you cannot use the funds to install lines to commercial, industrial, or public buildings. You cannot purchase or install equipment to transmit or receive broadband service. Funds cannot be used for internet service payments. These payments may qualify under public service application instead. Public services. An important note is that following the enactment of the CARES Act, the previous cap on public service activities of 15% has been suspended for CDBG-CV grants. A total assistance of $5 million is set aside for public services, with $3 million for housing assistance, $1 million for food shelves and pantries, and $1 million for COVID testing kits and personal protection equipment. The housing assistance category consists of providing either mortgage, rental, or utility payments for up to 6 continuous months to help prevent households facing foreclosure or eviction. Until we receive further guidance from HUD, the 100-day exemption for pre-1978 homes is in effect. What does this mean for us? Well, housing units that are pre-1978 can only receive up to 3 continuous months of assistance unless the unit has been documented to be lead cleared and safe. Units that are post-1978 may receive up to 6 continuous months of assistance. Payments must go to the provider instead of to the assisted household. Important to note here that grantee-owned public utility payments are not eligible. For this category, we have an assumed maximum of $120,000 per grantee with a max of $1,000 per month per household. The food shelf pantries category consists of supporting food shelves and pantries by providing increased access to food by restocking inventory and delivery support for those economically impacted by the pandemic and for those who are unable to access nutritious food. For this category, we have an assumed max of $35,000 per grantee. And the final category is in public service is COVID testing and PPE. CDBG-CV funds will support the purchase of COVID-19 testing kits and personal protection equipment, PPE, to help reduce the risk of exposure to COVID-19. Personal protection equipment includes and is not limited to gloves, masks, safety plexiglass shield barriers, and etc., to be utilized or distributed within the grantee's jurisdiction to comply with social distancing requirements. For this category, we have an assumed max of $40,000 per grantee. The final category is retrofitting, repurposing, or rehabilitation of buildings. These activities include and are not limited to repurposing buildings into COVID-19 patient treatment centers with an assumed maximum of $100,000 per building, retrofitting or renovating food shelves, pantries with an assumed maximum of $20,000 per building, and the rehab of existing facilities used for emergency shelter with an assumed maximum of $600,000 per building. Priority will be given to communities with a need to rehab existing shelter facilities that are not safe to continue operating and that do not meet the needs of special needs population or have potential for an increase of bed capacity. Keep in mind that these activities must prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus COVID-19. Commercial rehab is another activity under this category. CDBG-CV funds can be used to make the necessary improvements to commercial buildings in response to coronavirus COVID-19. Some examples would be replacing HVAC systems to improve air circulation, keyless entries, or any other eligible activities to improve social distancing. An assumed maximum for this activity would be $25,000 per building. Now that we have covered the eligible CDBG-CV activities offered by deed, let's go through some activities that are not eligible. CDBG-CV funds cannot be used for installment loans or revolving loan funds, purchase of local government vehicles, and salaries which include overtime payments for local government employees. I have mentioned in the earlier slides that public utility payments that are owned and operated by municipalities, and installation of broadband lines to commercial, industrial, or public buildings are not eligible. In the next couple of slides, we are going to discuss some general information of the CDBG-CV program. Applicants with an open or awarded CDBG or Small Cities Development Program grant may apply for CDBG-CV grants. CDBG-CV applications have to follow the same requirements and regulations as the regular CDBG grants, with the exception noted in the Federal Register notice. You can find the link to this notice in our resource slide. Again, an important note, the public service cap of 15% has been waived for CDBG-CV funds. Grantees must procure grant administrators. For for-profit administrators, such as engineering or architect firms, they must be procured via the common rule. Only one application per community. The community may apply for multiple activities. For example, apply for a public service and broadband, but not two broadband applications for the same community. There is a timeline with CDBG-CV grants. Projects must be completed within 32 months from the award letter. HUD requirement is that 80% of the CDBG-CV funds must be expended within a 3-year period. The funding agreement between HUD and DEED was dated March 3, 2021. In this slide, you will notice that the first bullet is in all caps and in bold. Please read the CDBG-CV application guide and the appropriate application instructions before completing the application. The guide and application is in the Community Development Funding website under the tab Small Cities Coronavirus CDBG-CV Program. A resolution should be adopted by the local government authorizing the submission of the CDBG-CV application and the execution of the grant contract if awarded. You will need to create a citizen participation plan and have it adopted before the public hearing. Applicants are subject to a capacity and performance evaluation, so all audits and Small Cities Development Program reports should be up to date and in good standing. Public hearings. The CARES Act provides that as long as national or local health authorities recommend social distancing and limiting public gatherings for public health reasons, a grantee may create virtual public hearings to fulfill applicable public hearing requirements related to the CDBG-CV grants. The virtual hearing shall provide reasonable notification and access for citizens in accordance with grantees' certifications. Timely responses from local officials to all citizen questions and issues, and public access to all questions and responses. Some platforms for virtual hearing can be Facebook, Zoom, Skype, email, and conference calls, but the grantee is not limited to these methods. Keep in mind that grantees must take appropriate actions to encourage the participation of all residents, including the elderly, minorities, and non-English speaking persons, as well as persons with disabilities. Duplication of benefit. This is another very important factor in the CDBG-CV funding. Duplication of benefit occurs when a person, household, business, or other entity receives financial assistance to address a federally declared emergency, and they receive this funding from multiple sources for the same purpose, and the total assistance received for that purpose is more than the total need for assistance. So in other words, CDBG-CV funds can only act as gap financing to address a need brought on by the declared emergency. Grant funds may not be used to pay for a particular cost if another source of financial assistance is available to fully pay for that same cost. Grantees must have procedures in place to prevent the duplication of benefits when it provides financial assistance with CDBG-CV funds. At a minimum, the procedures should include requirements that any person or entity receiving CDBG-CV assistance must agree to repay assistance that is determined to be duplicative. It should also contain a method of assessing whether the use of the CDBG-CV funds will duplicate financial assistance already received or is likely to be received. Therefore, the grantee can evaluate the need and the resources available for unmet needs and to avoid any duplication. A copy of the duplication of benefit, policies, and procedures must accompany the CDBG-CV application. A good practice is to maintain documentation of all CARES Act assistance, eligible activities, and availability of assistance. This will assist you in determining if there is a risk of duplication. This will also enable you to use CDBG-CV funds to address unmet needs or provide unduplicated assistance to low and moderate income persons. Bear in mind, a grantee is required to repay the CDBG-CV grant with non-federal funds if duplication of benefit has occurred or been discovered. Please refer to the CDBG-CV application guide and the link for duplication of benefit in the resource slide. Other federal requirements remain the same as with regular CDBG funds. For example, conflict of interest. If any elected officials are interested in participating in any activity, they must abstain from voting on advancing the application or any subsequent motion or declaration. Environmental reviews are required. The level of review for broadband would most likely be an EA, environmental assessment, but could become an EIS, an environmental impact statement, if one or more law and authority are impacted and cannot be mitigated. Public services would be categorically excluded, not subject to 58.5, while retrofitting, repurposing buildings, and commercial rehab would be categorically excluded, subject to 58.5. A fair housing and equal opportunity plan must be adopted and conducted throughout the grant. Federal Davis-Bacon prevailing wage and labor standards requirement will pertain to commercial rehab and retrofitting, repurposing of buildings, as well as broadband development. Reporting requirements. Quarterly, annual, and final reports are required. We are waiting for guidance from HUD in regards to reporting requirements for quarterly reports. It is important to understand that CDBG reporting requirements apply to CDBG-CV programs. For the time being, until we have further guidance, record all pertinent information such as income verification, household size, information from service providers, proof of residence, demographics of assisted persons, detailed description of the use of funds with supporting documents, and any other related information per activity. Quarterly reports are due 7 days after each calendar quarter. Monitoring. All CDBG-CV grants will be monitored. Program income. While we do not anticipate program income being generated, you will still need to keep track of any program income if generated. As a general rule, program income is generated when a grantee receives $35,000 or more during a federal fiscal year, October 1st to September 30th. CDBG-CV program income is treated the same way as regular CDBG program income and does not need to be tracked separately. After the grant closes, and if there is CDBG-CV program income generated, it does not have to be reused specifically for COVID-19 activities. We highly recommend grantee design their activities as grants instead of deferred loans, as all program income, whether generated by an entitlement community or a non-entitlement jurisdiction, would need to report program income to deed. So now let's talk about the scoring for this program. Since this is a competitive grant, small city staff will be scoring and ranking each application according to 3 main criteria: need, community impact, and cost effectiveness. Each criteria is allowed a maximum of 90 points, for a total of 270 points. This slide shows the scoring criteria for the broadband development application. For need, this area of rating will assess if the proposed service area has a need for new or enhanced broadband infrastructure. For example, the proposed size of the service area, the percentage of low to moderate income households benefiting from this project, the need for assistance required to connect communities to a broadband network, and if there is a lack of other available resources to access reliable broadband service. For impact, this area of rating will assess how the project will provide the ability for low to moderate income households to obtain new or enhanced access to broadband services. How will the project assist communities in preventing, preparing for, and responding to COVID-19? What is the proposed type of broadband infrastructure? What is the proposed average speed available to households? And if there are any other assistance provided to income qualified households as a result of this project. For cost effectiveness, this area of rating will assess the overall cost effectiveness of the proposed project. How realistic and reasonable is the budget for the project? Is there commitment and use of other funding sources? Will the project timeline be able to provide reliable broadband access to communities? Also, the capacity of project partners to successfully conduct and accomplish project activities and goals. And finally, is there a plan in place to prevent duplication of benefit? In this slide, we will be discussing the scoring criteria for the public services and repurposing, retrofitting buildings, and commercial rehab applications. For need, this area of rating will assess the project need, documented demand, proposed actions to meet the need, and the benefit to the identified target group. We would be looking to determine if the proposed activities are addressing the need to prepare, prevent, or respond to the health and economic impacts of COVID-19. If the proposed activities are taking place in an eligible area with elevated COVID-19 outbreaks, with supporting data from state or local health officials. Is the proposed activities meeting one of the three national objectives? The two national objectives most applicable to the CDBG-CV program are benefit to low and moderate income persons, LMI, and urgent need. Benefit to LMI persons may be either direct, actual people served, or area-wide. Urgent need can be used as the national objective for commercial rehab. And has the applicant provided sufficient explanation concerning their ability to successfully document the benefit to LMI persons? For impact, this area of rating will assess the overall impact on the community. Are the proposed activities addressing the program intent, incorporating the areas of focus, and establishing performance measures for current and future assessments? Are the goals specific, measurable, action-oriented, attainable, and realistic? Applicants must be able to document the long-term viability and the ability to link services if the type of facility requires specific services for their clientele. This relates particularly to COVID treatment centers and the rehab of shelters. What is the project timeline to meet the grant deadline? Applicants need to identify all major tasks or components that will be required in carrying out the activity. Will the applicant be primarily dependent upon CDBG-CV funding? For cost effectiveness, the area of rating will assess the overall cost effectiveness. Is there local commitment and a concerted effort for funds from other sources other than CDBG-CV funds? Is the budget realistic with a reasonable estimate of resources necessary for each component of the project? Does the applicant have the capacity and the experience in administrating CDBG program projects or other related state and federal funding projects? Are they aware of policies and procedures? Do they have any established partnership with community groups, nonprofits, and other agencies for funding or administration? And finally, is there a plan in place to prevent duplication of benefit? Application submission. DATE will accept applications due on or before June 1st, 2021. There are two submittal options, either by mail or hand-delivered. If you are planning to hand-deliver the application, please contact Irene at the phone number on the slide or follow the instructions on the cart in front of DATE's reception area. The cart will be in front of the reception area on June 1st, 2021. Please note that we require one original and one copy of the application. Both copies need to contain all the required documentations and be printed in color. The original application must have original signatures for all documents that require signatures. DATE reserves the right to refuse any application or condition any grant award based on past performance, outstanding grant violation, continuing capacity issues to carry out current activities in a timely manner, and incomplete application. This includes applications that are missing signatures, attachments, missing copies, budgets, and cover sheet, and so forth. The timeline for the CDBG-CV applications are as follows. CDBG-CV guide and applications were posted on the Small Cities Development Program website as of April 16, 2021. The due date for the CDBG-CV applications are on June 1st, 2021. We anticipate funding recommendations to Deeds Commissioner around mid-June. Grant award announcements and grant agreement development is estimated to occur early July 2021. We will have the recorded webinar and Q&As out by next week. On this slide is the link to the CDBG-CV guide, application, and all required documents for this grant. On this resource slide, we have a list of links that may prove helpful. In August 2020, HUD had published the Federal Register containing important program rules, waivers, and regulations. We also have a link to the national objectives, duplication of benefits, and the LMI calculation map for broadband. Please take time to review these links. Before we take on any Q&As, I wanted to go through some FAQs just to get the ball rolling. So the first question, can properties that received SCDP funds in the past and have active lien agreements receive CDBG-CV funding? Yes, they can. This funding is not connected to normal SCDP funds. Can housing assistance payments be used for past due payments? Yes, as long as there is no duplication of benefits and the payments are continuous 6 months with no breaks or gaps in between. For homes that are pre-1978, we will still need to wait for further guidance from HUD if the 100-day exemption would be waived. If a client receives 3 months' worth of assistance for rent or mortgage, and then does not need assistance for the next 2 months, but needs assistance again, can they apply again for the remaining 6 months? No. Payments can only be made for up to 6 months continuously only. Who can housing assistance payments be made to? Rent, mortgage, and/or utility assistance payments must be made directly to the provider on behalf of the client. The next 2 questions are on duplication of benefit. So, can you apply CDBG-CV funds for uses supported by other CARES Act funds? CDBG-CV funds cannot be used to pay for eligible costs that have already been paid for or will be paid for by another federal program, insurance, or any other sources. What happens if a duplication of benefit occurs? Well, the grantee will then have to repay the CDBG-CV grant with non-federal dollars. Will grantees be required to use existing program income as leverage? No. Existing CDBG PI does not need to be included as leverage. Do funds need to be offered in a form of a deferred loan or a grant? Grantees will need to make that decision on their own, but we fully encourage you to design your projects as grants. So here are a couple more questions on PI. Does the reuse of PI generated by CDBG-CV funding need to be COVID-19 related? The reuse of CDBG-CV PI does not need to be specifically geared towards COVID-19 related projects after the grant closes. Will we need to track PI generated from CDBG-CV separately from PI generated by traditional CDBG funds? No, you don't need to treat them or track them separately. CDBG-CV will be treated just as you would treat formula CDBG-PI upon receipt. Is mortgage or rental assistance available to non-LMI residents affected by COVID-19? Unfortunately, no. Assistance is only available to low to moderate income households. This is a national objective. What are the requirements needed for a LMI person to qualify for mortgage or rental assistance? You will need documentation that non-payment of mortgage, rent, or utility was directly related to COVID-19. Now we're down to our last two questions in our FAQ. Will there be reporting required? Yes. There will be quarterly, annual, and final reporting required, separate from traditional SCDP fund reporting. Is a match required or preferred? Match is not required, but leverage is always preferred. We have about half an hour to answer some questions. We had some questions that came through via email prior to this webinar, and there are some questions that came through during the presentation. If you need to leave the webinar, but you do have questions in regards to the CDBG application, materials, or the overall program, please send us your questions via email to the smallcities@state.mn.us email, and we will get back to you as soon as possible.